Howdy. Thanks for listening to Let the Movie Speak. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a favor of you.
It's a simple favor. If you could just rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen, that might help other ears get into our ecosystem here and hear another episode. Anyway, enjoy the show.
Let the movie speak.
Welcome back, listeners. This is episode 2 of Let the Movie Speak's heist series. We're kind of calling it series 1.5. This is kind of cleansing the palate, as it were, between our normal decade series. We finished up the 30s. We're kind of looking forward towards the 40s. And between, we wanted to pick something interesting and sort of subgenre based. And as you know, my name is Travis, and we have another host here. Who's that waiting in the wings?
Who is that? It's me. It's Justin.
Oh, it's me you're looking for. Let's just let that sit there.
No,
That's fantastic.
You're not looking for me.
No, I didn't want you here, but you just showed up, which is par for the course.
Right.
Barging in.
I'm all you've got.
Yep, we are inherently linked, unfortunately, but... No, really, in all seriousness, I don't like Justin. We've just been putting on an act this whole time.
Right.
So this is our audition for
It's mutual.
the Shakespearean Royal Theater. Anyway, we're excited to get into this next heist film, which is, again, as we mentioned last week, it is one of the quote-unquote best heist movies ever made. According to some folks, it's sort of the archetype for the plot of a lot of movies you may have seen, and I think we're going to have a great conversation about it. But before we get there, Justin, what do you say we give the people a little insight into what we watched this week? Does that sound good?
I say we better do that before we kill each other.
Yep. All right. So as to avoid murdering each other, let's have a nice conversation about what we watched this week. And why don't you start us off, Justin?
Well, Travis, I had the privilege, honor, distinct character trait. I just watched a movie this week, and it was called Crazy Rich Asians.
Ah, yeah.
I knew nothing about this movie. I had not seen a trailer or any footage or anything. It simply came across the screen as I swiped or doodled or whatever through one of the streaming services. And my wife and I thought, what the heck? So, when this movie first came out, I really wasn't sure what to make of the title, besides it being rather ridiculous sounding. I thought, someone is about to get, sued. Is this a really insensitive documentary, or what? What is this? But no, it's just a romantic comedy directed by John Chu, based on a novel by a gentleman named Kevin Kwan. And it has to do with the super rich or elite in Singapore. And it's not. I am not someone who is super well versed in East Asian affairs. So it does seem that Singapore. It's never really discussed in the film because it's not a part of it. But Singapore apparently has a large amount of Chinese expats, and then there's also some Malaysian people that seem to be there, and some people that are Indian as well. So that I don't really know how the dynamic of everything works on this wonderful island of Singapore. But as far as that's really not really even interesting if you're listening, listener. So you'll have to forgive me for that. I'm just trying to stall for time. So Travis, doesn't shoot me before the police get here.
Yes.
So,
Keep
you
talking.
know, this movie has to do with a gal who is a economics professor in New York somewhere, and she's going to marry this guy, and she knows he's from Singapore, but that's kind of all she knows. Anyway, she goes over there to meet his family and finds out they're like, the Rockefellers or something of Singapore. And hilarity ensues as she tries to find her way into the family when they don't really want her to be there because she's not super rich or, of the same pedigree or whatever. Anyway, all of that really boring stuff to say, it was an okay movie. It's just very, I mean, there's some really good stuff. Michelle Yeoh plays the kind of matriarch of the family. She's amazing. Awkwafina has a supporting role in there. She's funny. Ken Jeong is in there, hilarious. So it's not a problem of not having good things for these people to do on screen. It has a very large budget, it appears, and it aims too low, in my opinion. Listeners and Travis, put that knife down. It's like the movie can't decide what it really wants to be. Does it want to be this super sweet, kind of love story that feels very American at times? Or does it want to hold on the shot of the really muscular guy's body as he gets out of the shower? Or does it want to indulge in the ludicrous amount of wealth that some of these people have? So the movie's, kind of to ruin it for you, the thesis of the movie essentially is like, all that wealth doesn't really matter. I can give it up, for true love, which again seems very American, but and that's the choice that these characters make, which is fine. But then at the same time, I'm just trying to say, Travis, in my opinion anyway, this movie gives some very mixed or lukewarm messages.
Yeah.
I don't really know where it stands. It seems to kind of wink and be happy at all the ludicrous displays of wealth and at the same time say, no, we don't really need that. We just need love. And so because of that, it doesn't really make a strong statement about anything, in my opinion. But that was probably the worst recap I've ever done, so let me pass the baton to you now. Not the literal one, though.
Yes.
Please don't beat me with this.
Yes,
okay?
This baton is tattered and worn, and you dragged this sucker through the mud. But I'll pick it up, polish it off, and bring us back to something we have been covering. Breaking news, everybody. Probably weeks after you've seen it, we are still watching WandaVision. And so, yeah, I haven't caught any extra movies other than the ones we've assigned ourselves for mandatory viewing for this show. But I have been keeping up with WandaVision. And what would this be? Episode 6, which is our sort of 90s era WandaVision episode. And well, let's be gracious. Let's be fair. We had some rocky stuff happen. Episode 4 and 5. 4 was really a stinker. 5 was a little better, but still the parts that happened outside of Wanda World were very. They were a slog. Let's be honest. They were not fun to watch. And I think if this show is capable of striking a balance between trying to tell the fantastical, sort of really weird, a little bit more avant-garde, like narrative stuff that they were doing at the beginning, this may be the best balance of that we've seen so far, for a couple reasons. Some of it is just like the ratio of time spent in the town and outside of Wanda's hex, as no one is calling it, according to one character, until they just all start calling it that, because of course they do. But yeah, I think you just spend a little bit less time, makes it a little bit more palatable with those characters who are a little bit more cookie cutter, Marvel, again, movie by committee kind of style. And the main thing is it continues to just freaking nail the aesthetics when they want to. This is a 90s sitcom, so think, like really almost a carbon copy, almost like the Bewitched opening for the 60s episode was so like pitch perfect in its rendition. This is like a Malcolm in the Middle style send up, complete with like, talking head interviews from the young boys, which feel very 90s in a good way. Like if you were growing up in the 90s like we were, and sort of coming of age around those styles of sitcom, this again, like there's no expense spared on getting those details right and just kind of immersing you in that world of TV. One thing I keep realizing about the show is that it loves the things that it is satirizing, and that comes through. Like any good satire, it has to have a little bit of heart. It can't just be a cold, calculated thing, even if it's commenting on something, in society. And I'm reminded of an interview I heard with Dana Carvey, right, where he's talking about Alec Baldwin's Donald Trump impression on SNL, which just dominated their time slot, at the cold opens and all that, kind of for the whole of his tenure in office. And Dana Carvey, who's a master impersonator, part of this machine in the 90s of SNL satirizing George H.W. Bush and Ross Perot, and just like he did every impression, right? He says like I can't really watch Alec Baldwin's Trump because it's all just kind of based out of pure spite, and he's like not making the case that like you should love Donald Trump or anything like that, but he's saying that the impression suffers because the satire is all about sort of just like a place of pure hatred. And one thing I do appreciate about WandaVision, Justin, and I think I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, is when it comes to capturing the decade, which again could be a novelty thing. It does not have to mean anything. The reason it really works is because it supports the story that is interesting and worth telling, and it's just so well done.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it not only it is not just a gimmicky kind of thing, like you said, where I think it's clear that, maybe it's part and parcel of it being something that was obviously dear to whoever is helping craft these episodes from a production standpoint. Just the love of those eras comes through, especially in the advertisements. This week we get the claymation advertisement that feels like a Chips Ahoy commercial from 30 years ago. And it's fantastic. And when you talk about giving credit where it's due, you and I not super big fans of CGI because of how often it seems to be misused, or used as an excuse or something. But in this episode, I think we both appreciated the way that CGI was used when Mr. Vision is trying to crawl out of Wanda world into the real world, and he seems to be disintegrating.
Yeah, that was really, I think, as I was finishing it, I was texting you, and we were like, is this one going to be good or not? And my immediate reaction was, this is one of the, not the first, but like in a long time at least, CGI came on the scene really in like kind of like the early to mid 90s, and it was really bad for a while. It just totally dominated, the late 90s, the early aughts, and the 2010s, and a lot of genre filmmaking. But it's starting to, like, the novelty in some ways is starting to wear off, and you see that in huge franchises like Star Wars, where practical effects have made this big comeback for the better. With any issues I might have with anything Star Wars has done in the last 6-7 years, the one thing I don't have a problem with is like every creature design and all that stuff that's just as tactile, and like they really are acting against a person or a creature. That all is fantastic. It's also true of the action and horror genres that of late. They've kind of stopped with the Wanted / Matrix, really CGI heavy action sequences, and it's really all about choreography nowadays. That's why things like John Wick and even stuff like the Fast and the Furious and everything kind of post Jason Bourne was like, oh, maybe we shouldn't just like blast people in the eyes with CGI. Maybe we should actually like hire some professionals to come in and let's keep it in the Marvel world. We both watched Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and liked it pretty well at the time, especially. I don't know that it holds up as well as it did when I initially saw it, based on everything that came after it. But the one thing we both walked away with is like, man, the choreography in that movie, like the fight sequences, are incredible. And this is an odd moment for me and you to be looking at an effects-heavy sequence where it's all CGI. There's no practical anything happening with Vision, kind of turning into dust and kind of chunks and pieces. And it's also Paul Bettany just is a fantastic, actor. He is making this material way better than it should come off. And so in that moment when he's being literally torn apart, torn to shreds, like he helps sell it. The CGI works because his character already looks so otherworldly, and yeah, so that's a great moment. And not to mention, they make a good narrative move in this episode too, near the end. Justin, when you want to tell the folks about that?
Yeah, just when, Wanda essentially realizes through one of her sons, both of her kids have now developed abilities, and that's kind of interesting to see where they go kind of with the family. I do hope that her brother hangs around for, I don't know if he's only going to work in this kind of, distinct environment of the WandaVision world, but I have no problem with Aaron Taylor Johnson as an actor who was her brother in Age of Ultron, but Evan Peters as Pietro now, he's like a perfect fit. So I'll be interested to see what else they might do with him. But anyway, to get to your the point you were making, so Wanda realizes that Vision is in trouble and disintegrating, and hell is breaking loose, and so she uses her powers essentially to push out the boundaries of Westview, the fictional town they're in, or maybe not fictional. We don't really know. The Hex. Yeah, I'm sorry. I misspoke, listeners. The Hex. We should put a clip in here of what's her name? Darcy, whatever, saying that.
I'm calling it the Hex. No one. It's not catching on yet, but I'm going to keep calling it that.
That was me dropping a clip.
Thank you. I could tell, and it made me laugh because I was impressed at your speed and your dexterity with that keyboard. So she pushes out the boundaries of Westview, and it kind of consumes almost everyone except for the sort of evil, vaguely incompetent director Hayward guy who's fleeing with two other people in an unmarked Tahoe or something.
It's always a Tahoe. It's always a big black Tahoe. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. Well, it's reality, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In this day and age. But so they push out the boundary and take over essentially the consciousness and the physicalness of these other vehicles and things. So, and everyone gets turned into like a clown or an ice cream truck or a hot air balloon or a tent, So, I don't know, Travis, what you think, but I couldn't quite tell if that was just a very on the nose, like, we get it, this is rather clownish, but I can't really buy that because of how serious it's presented from the get-go. So I do think it may only serve a narrative purpose, but I guess ideally it would be both.
Yeah, I think whether they are being as smart with that, not just changing them to like townspeople, but changing the whole of the military operation to a circus, like a literal circus, clowns and sideshows and carts and tents and all that. That even if it doesn't end up being some like interesting little a satirical commentary or biting kind of thing, it's at least for me and for you, I'm sure, it's hope that, we've just erased a lot of the problems that were born in episode 4, potentially, for the last, 3 episodes of the show to become, again, Wanda World just erased and took over the things that we didn't like. And I don't know. I feel like whereas a couple episodes ago, I thought, like we both said, this isn't going to recover. There's no way. At this point, it may go either way. Like we may look back on it and say, like, well, I don't think I would make episode 4 the way they made it, but they did it to undo it, and that is sort of interesting, I think, potentially. So let's escape Wanda World and Westview and get into what is essentially the future for us. It's the furthest forward we've gone in cinematic history, and it is the first 1950s and beyond film that we've covered. And we're going to start it off with our intro section that we call Hatching the Plan.
What's in the case?
That information isn't necessary.
Is it heavy? Is it explosive? Is it chained to some unlucky bloke's wrist? We're going to have to chop it off?
All right.
What in the bag she gave you?
She didn't give me a bag. Melanie was not a part of the plan.
Oh, no, we can get through the rock. No worries there. Easiest thing in the world. Why, we just blow right through it.
10 ought to do it, don't you think? You think we need one more? You think we need one more? All right, we'll get one more.
All right, so this is a John Huston directed classic heist film. It is called The Asphalt Jungle. Definitely in the noir world, like our last film, Crisscross. But let's take a moment to discuss the director, because this is another big-time director in the vein of, a Frank Capra. John Huston directed The Asphalt Jungle, but his first film, we found out in our preliminary research for this, was a film we both love and admire, The Maltese Falcon with Humphrey Bogart. And among others, he did a lot of sort of classic titles throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, and then he kind of started acting too. He acted kind of throughout after the first decade of his career, let's say. He earned himself a Best Supporting Actor Oscar nomination later on, and so it's kind of a man who wears many hats in the movie world, Justin, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and doesn't just wear them, but wears them well. I don't know if you're not familiar with John Huston. I think you owe it to yourself, if you're a fan of film, not just to check out The Maltese Falcon or this movie, The Asphalt Jungle, or any of the other movies that he's directed, which have been fantastic, but to see him in a supporting role in like Roman Polanski's Chinatown, or what's that movie, Travis, we were just talking about a few weeks ago, The Other Side of the Wind, which just got released on Netflix a couple years ago, I think.
Yep, it's the Orson Welles story, or it's about a movie he didn't finish, right? It's the log line is a Hollywood director emerges from semi-exile and with plans to complete work on an innovative motion picture. And it is like the finished Orson Welles film that never got done, or something interesting like that.
Exactly. I forget who the guy's name is that he helped or that worked with Orson Welles. Peter
Bogdanovich.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, there you go. See, this man with his quick clips of side Marvel characters, and equally quick with his knowledge of obscure movies released on Netflix.
You see, all I did was I just hacked into the hex, and then I found in the mainframe, and then Peter Bogdanovich popped up, and I was just like,
Oh my gosh! I was that a deleted scene from WandaVision? I don't remember that scene.
Yeah, a convenient deleted scene. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So John Huston is. This guy is a titan. And if you see him direct, well, how can you see him direct? If you watch the product of what he's directed, you can see that. But you can equally see that, I think, when he stands in front of the camera. The man has a very commanding presence, and should be remembered, I think, as he is.
Yeah, and for this film, The Asphalt Jungle, certainly a well-regarded movie of its time, and it has stood the test of time. We have 4 Oscar nominations here. Best Actor for Sam Jaffe, which we'll talk about him. He's pretty great in this movie. Best Director for him, John Huston. Best Writing for Ben Maddow and John Huston, and Best Black and White Cinematography. So, having watched the film, before we get into our real thoughts, those are all pretty well-earned nominations, in my opinion. But other things to note about The Asphalt Jungle would be that it featured let's say, a precursor performance in an interesting way of Sterling Hayden as Dix Handley. He would go on to play I would say, pretty similar role in Stanley Kubrick's The Killing. And that's notable because The Killing, it arguably lifts the basic plot of this movie, as do a lot of films. I think Ocean's 11, the original and the remake, basically deal with a similar structure. And there's a lot of heist movies that fall into this mold. So I think this was a good pick for us. And I'm excited to get into the characters and the plot and all the themes. Anything else on John Huston or the intro to the film before we move into the meat and potatoes section here, Justin?
I'm ready for the main course, sir. Bring it on.
All right, let's get into the goods.
You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
I want to take over his operation, and I need you to help me break it.
What want to do to me, eh? I've got Jessel's money.
I thought it was understood that when it came to our little enterprise, Mom was the word.
All right, so The Asphalt Jungle is a heist film, as we've already established, but I think we might start to see more commonalities in this little subgenre that we've picked. And one of those is going to be the double cross, or as the last film called it, the crisscross. And this is certainly no stranger to that plot wrinkle. The whole idea of this movie, which I think is really interesting narratively, Justin, if we just talk about how the story is laid out at the beginning, you've got some pretty swift, but I think interesting and thorough character introductions. And then what do we see? Well, like in the first hour of the film, before the first hour is up, if I'm not mistaken, the heist is done, right? Like the heist is completed and over, and then the rest of the movie that plays out is not really about the heist, it's really about people. And I think that's the strength of the film. It's not all about wires being cut and, tunnels being dug and all of the sort of fun stuff that goes into the fantasy nature of what would it be like to rob a bank or any other thing. That is a bit of a means to an end. Not to say that it's not done well. What was your experience with the Asphalt Jungle? Was this your first time watching it?
This was my first time watching it, and I would agree with you that this is a movie that seeks more to examine the humanity behind people that would do this kind of thing. And it does remind me, not because of plot or style necessarily, although there are some overlaps there, but with the first movie we ever did for the series, with M.
Yeah.
Which is, it's about a serial killer, but it's not real. I mean, the real heart of that movie is about what does society do with, how do we reckon with ourselves when people like that exist in our midst? And so this movie is very much in the same vein of, okay, they did this thing, this heist. Now what? What is the aftermath of that? And that is, to me at least, so much more interesting. Even though, hey, I'm down for. We're doing a whole series on heist movies, for crying out loud. So obviously we do like that. And when scenes like that are pulled off well, that's really entertaining to watch. But it's not nearly as meaningful as the kind of questions that this movie tries to explore.
That's right. And I think the key thing for me is, this is, we're calling it a subgenre, but like heists happen in lots of different kinds of movies, especially in the 40s and 50s, where we've already kind of covered this in our last episode. Noir was the popular, pervading story aesthetic, right? So films like Crisscross and the Asphalt Jungle were certainly not uncommon. This was all the Humphrey Bogart flicks that you've seen kind of fall within this black and white, fedora, really a man at the center of a lot of these stories, or maybe a man in a femme fatale or a female character. And this is in the same kind of vein, but it's not. This is not a fun movie, right? Like, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just it's seeking to say a lot more, and it feels different, right? One of my first notes on this movie is, I don't even know how many minutes in, probably not that many. This movie feels grimy, right? Like the world that it is attempting to convey, like M, Fritz Lang's M, it's not a pretty one in a lot of ways, and the people in it they're all some version of unsatisfied or looking for more, right? And again, if we bring back that Coen Brothers theme of, money might solve my problems, I might do anything to get the money. There's some of that here. But for a lot of characters, they're seeking more than that, I'd say. So let's talk about some of those characters. We have Sterling Hayden, who's top billed as Dix Handley. We have Louis Calhern as Alonzo D. Emmerich. He is the, I would say wealthy, but he's certainly not that based on what we're told in the story. He is the seemingly wealthy or aristocratic financier, questionable financier of the heist. Gene Hagen plays Doll Conovan, who is really a B character who becomes an important character in the latter third of the movie. That reminded me of the 39 Steps, Justin, because we have this sort of on the run story where the female character, who doesn't necessarily seem like she's going to be ultra significant, really becomes that and sort of takes over, right, some of the plot in an important way. And then James Whitmore as Gus Manissi, who's just a great character in this colorful but really layered and interesting. Our Oscar-nominated actor Sam Jaffe as Doc Erwin Reidenschneider, who is a big part of the story, a driving force. And then a bunch of other important, you know, what's great about this, Justin, and let me know what you think, is all of these characters matter. Like there's not a single character in this story that I can think of that doesn't, you know, do something significant, even if they don't have a lot of lines or a lot of screen time.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And, you know, before watching this movie, I did read a couple contemporary reviews from the time, just because I'm sick and twisted and want to read the reviews before the movie. That's my fetish.
Spoilers for a movie made 75 years ago.
Yeah, from 1950. I don't remember what publication or what the author was, but, you know, he's essentially praising this movie. Oh, the Asphalt Jungle, it's great. And his last sentence is something like, and there's a beautiful blonde, too, played by Marilyn Monroe. And that's like it. Yeah. It's like all he had to say about her. And I thought, oh, okay, that doesn't sound very promising. And so while this movie introduces her in that way, where I thought, you know, where is that going? I was really pleased with what they ended up doing. I mean, she's a minor character. She's not meant to really do much, right. But I was frankly impressed that they did choose to say, they used that character to actually say something. Mm-hmm. And she turns out to be one of the very few honest people in the film, which you wouldn't really expect. So yeah, I completely agree with you. Everyone matters, and everyone says something. They all say something, I guess, overarchingly similar. Right. You called it unsatisfied. I think that's spot on. I think it's also that people they're trying to fulfill themselves, which is very similar to being unsatisfied. I concede. But and then that kind of backfiring on them. Right. And so it's so much fun to watch, even for the commissioner, right? The police boss, Lieutenant Dietrich's boss. In the beginning, he's introduced and he just seems kind of like a hard ass, and, you know, like, okay, well, whatever, who really cares? But then by the end of the movie, when he gives that monologue to the reporters, it's like, whoa, okay, we put this guy in here for a reason, to make some serious social commentary. So there's lots of unexpected surprises like that, I think, from just about every character. Yeah, and I totally agree. Like, every character that I saw, honestly, even Sterling Hayden at the beginning, like every character that I saw that I thought, this person may just be a cog, you know, just there to move something along or to be very archetypal, they all turn out to be really interesting. I mean, and I think this does some things that maybe Criss Cross kind of tried to do a little bit better in that regard. Like, Criss Cross isn't a bad film by any means, but this movie rises above the level of just fine because all the characters matter. They all have a distinct arc. So whether you like, you know, Marilyn Monroe's character, or, you know, Sam Jaffe as Ryden Schneider, or Gene Hagen, or Sterling Hayden, you know, Louis Calhern even, who's not a good guy by any means, they all really have good endings, even if they're not happy endings, because they're significant and they mean something. There's a few things that happen early on here that establish well. You know, Sterling Hayden is set up as this more small-time crook, just sort of like a generic, you know, robber, and not a big-time, big score kind of a guy. Certainly not a smart character, and they really pigeonhole him, I think on purpose and in a really smart way. Characters, they refer to him and they pigeonhole him as the country boy, right? The strong-armed country boy. And he is. Let's talk about Sterling Hayden for a minute, because I have a few interesting questions and kind of notes on him. I did not think, like, his first couple scenes were very good. Like, I was watching him and I was thinking, like, man, this guy's kind of wooden. Like, you know, for top billing, like, I do not expect him to blow me away. I think I wrote down, I sense that Hayden won't do it for me as the movie plays out. This is on page 1 of my notes, and I was happy to be have those expectations subverted, because he's, you know, he is in a lot of ways almost the precursor to, like, the sort of Clint Eastwood Man with No Name, like soft spoken, but there's a lot going on there. And I immediately got Josh Brolin vibes from this guy, because he has, like, the manly jaw and just sort of like the physical presence, but he's not super verbose. You know what I mean? He doesn't, like, talk his way out of problems. He
punches his way out of problems, and he's a man of principle. We see that early on because the bookie, known as Cobby, who is sort of greasy in a wonderful way, he wants him to pay his tab. He immediately takes offense at that, and this is how he gets into the sort of winding, twisting plot of Dr. Reidenschneider is out of prison. He has this scheme for a really good haul, this robbery they can make. So a little bit of a classic gathering the group scenario. But as Sterling Hayden plays Dix Handley and gets into the story and becomes a more significant player, and he almost looks like he's going to fade away, but then they bring him into this heist and he becomes very, very important and essential. He really came into his own as a character and as a performance. And by the end, we'll talk about the end when we get there, but like this movie ends on him, right? This is squarely his movie by the time you get to the last frame. So what was your impression of Dix Handley in this story?
Man, I thought the same exact thing. Wooden, like a board. I thought he was a 2x4 in a suit. And it turns out that he is not. It's tough with a movie like this. I think that's hard. And frankly, Travis, I don't really know if it's done anymore, where I won't call it the gumption to do that, but just the ability to put your leading man or leading lady out there and no, this is your character. You have to act this way. There's no like tag or not tag. What am I trying to say? Like there's nothing to pull you in with this character. It does didn't quite make me go like oof, but it was getting close. I said ooh. And then my wife said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Where's the nearest Home Depot? We need to find more lumber because this one ain't working."
Yes.
No, that's not what I said. But, it is a real. I think it's a testament to John Huston's work ethic, where he believed in where Sterling Hayden could take this character and where it could go. And frankly, I don't think the character's arc. You talked about the ending. I'm excited to get there too. I don't think his arc would be as meaningful if he was more like, if he had more personality, because that character it's not going to work in the same way. You cannot sell this character in the same way. Yeah. Especially when he's surrounded by, it's another great thing about this movie, Travis, is all the characters, because they all matter and they all have an arc. They're all very distinct. You're not going to confuse Gus with Doc or, they're just all, there's no like, oh, they didn't really write that guy very well, or could have cast that better. And so I just really appreciate the way that they allow Sterling Hayden to grow. I think you said something similar to that. He kind of grows on you.
Yeah.
And that's at least what he did for me. By the time he's in the room with Emmerich and what's that guy, Bob Branham?
Yeah.
The private detective. I was pulling for Dix to get out of it. Okay. And I think that's just a testament to real clear direction and just a certainty about how to pull off not a heist but a movie.
That's right. Yeah. So the heist itself, right, is a pretty simple one. It's a what is it? Is it a bank or is it like a jeweler? There's a safe with diamonds in it. I don't know that they ever talk about what establishment specifically it is, but Reidenschneider has this scheme. He knows how to get in, break into the safe, and there's supposed to be over something like $500,000 worth of diamonds, which is an immense amount of money for the time. And they pulled the team together, as it were. They enlist Anthony Caruso's character, Louis Chiavelli, who has a wife and a kid, and that's mentioned very early on, and I think for a purpose. We have Cobby is brought into this immediately, but I love that they introduce the idea, and then it plays out to be exactly true. Right, there's a line early on where Cobby says, "Well, how big is the score?" And someone says, "Too big for you, Cobby." Right, like he's immediately shrunken as a man, and he plays it very well, but he is not as big time as he thinks he is, and we see that when he cracks under the pressure of Lieutenant Dietrich's very plain-spoken words to him later on. In addition to that, they bring in Sterling Hayden as the muscle, really, the driver and the muscle and sort of the presence there. And because Sam Jaffe's character, Reidenschneider, he he gravitates towards Dix early on. He just sees something in his eyes or in the way he carries himself. He says, I feel good about this guy. Let's bring him in. And that's kind of the crew: Ryden, Schneider, Handley, and Chiavelli. They're the three that break in and they get the diamonds, but things don't go perfectly in that regard. A night watchman comes around and the gun goes off. It hits Chiavelli. They're supposed to bring the money to the next character I think we should settle on for a moment, which is Louis Calhern as Alonzo D. Emmerich. Why don't you give us the rundown on Emmerich, Justin?
Yeah, I think you started off saying he is kind of this, well, now I forgot the word that you used, but essentially aristocratic or, highfalutin, elitist, financially independent gentleman of means who employs servants and has a mistress in the form of Marilyn Monroe's character, who is named Angela. And he comes across, when you're first introduced to him, everyone seems to say, yes, this guy he's our money man. He can finance this thing, $50,000 to get you guys to do this job. That's no problem at all. We'll just go to him. And then as we learn quickly, once we're introduced to Emmerich in person, we find out that he works with this kind of crooked private eye called Bob Branham. And he sends Bob to collect some debts that are owed to him, and Branham doesn't have any success, which I think is important for what happens to him later. And so Emmerich he decides, you know what then? No problem, Bob. Here's what we'll do. We will just, when they bring the diamonds in, we'll just give them the old double cross. And so he's the way that Emmerich is presented is I don't know, it's a little bit refreshing, frankly, because often in these kind of movies you have the financier he is wealthy and people know he's wealthy. Well, in this you have people that know he's wealthy, but actually he's not, and he's this really broken, insecure, unfaithful, what does the commissioner call him? Like a creepy old, it's worse than that. I forget what he calls him, but something like a creepy old man.
I think he calls him a lech or something like that.
Yeah, and aptly, I think. I don't think that's unfair. But Emmerich just turns out to be just the kind of, in despite that the world does kind of crash around him at the end of his arc, it's really interesting that he almost settles into a comfort about that.
Yeah.
He's very distressed that he doesn't have the money. He snaps at Bob. He's ready to do the double cross, but when that fails, and then eventually the police kind of catch up to him, he seems kind of resigned to his fate, which I thought was really fascinating. Here's a man that has, I think, spent so long being stressed out and living in the wrong. I don't know if this is a little bit similar to like a Dostoevsky kind of thing where the guilt is what finds you out, but I don't know if he feels some kind of release and, is like, okay, now it's out there. He kind of sits back and is smoking his cigar the last time we see him.
Yeah.
But I don't know, would now be a good time to talk about the minor role? Well, I was going to say that Marilyn Monroe plays, but probably what makes more sense is to actually talk about what the aftermath of the heist is before we get there.
Right. Yeah. So you see this double cross. It's a really dumb plot, right? Like, and that's setting up Emmerich as like a paper tiger version of this like ultra wealthy. He's not really wealthy. He's out of money. Like, his whole plot is, well, I'll just tell them I don't have any money and they'll leave the diamonds with us. Well, that's stupid. These guys just risked their lives and one of them got shot stealing this stuff. That's like, they're not just going to give you the diamonds. So suffice it to say, Branham does not make it out of that exchange alive because Dix has quicker hands, but Branham gets shot dead on the spot by Dix. And then, Emmerich's still on the hook for his amount, even though he's a character driven by desperation, right? And you called it guilt, and I'll use the word desperation because immediately we see, he has this affair with Angela, Marilyn Monroe's character. He has this, seemingly lovely wife who still loves him and wants to, sort of like bring back the good old days of their marriage and their love. And he just has, nothing. And he's sort of driven to do this scheme with Ryden Schneider and the double cross that was attempted in order to just like get out, right? He specifically says like, I need to get out of the country and just start over, sort of a thing. And I think this is his last gasp. And what is interesting about his end, right, is we find that when he fails, that's it. Like that was the last straw for him. Like he doesn't have anything left. He knows he's caught, and he does exactly what you might think someone as a tragic character might do. He ends his own life. And it's a really commanding, nuanced performance. There's some fantastic stuff in there that he has. He has that line when Dix does finally gun down Branham after they try to double cross them. Dix says, what's inside of you? What's keeping you alive? Basically, like, why would you do this? And he says, why don't you kill me? At that point already, you can kind of see the cracks in the foundation there of his character. It's just this desperate, this guilt-laden performance. And I agree. To bring up Marilyn Monroe's performance or the usage of her character is, it's inevitable, but initially you see, okay, so she's there to be the sex symbol, which is, it is Marilyn Monroe after all. And I don't mean that to be disparaging to her, but that is the mold she fell into, whether it was her doing or not. She was cast and seen from a national viewpoint as the sex symbol for multiple reasons. And I do think this rises above that. For me, I don't know that it's because she's such a fantastic actor. I mean, specifically at one point, she says like "yip" like 3 times in one scene, and I was like,
No, it's yipe.
Is it yipe?
Yipe.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Who the heck says yipe?
I don't know. I don't know what that was, but I was not blown away by that. But her character certainly is used in an important way, like you said. And let's just let's get through some of these secondary characters that are killer. I mean, I wouldn't even call Sam Jaffe's Reidenschneider a secondary character because he really is like a feature player here. He earned that Oscar nom. He is early on, right, talking about Marilyn Monroe's usage in the film. His downfall is so obvious if you look for it, right? Mm-hmm. And he is all about the ladies, right? Like one of the first things he says is like, I want to get to Mexico. This will be my last score. And they have beautiful young women there, beautiful young women. You wouldn't believe these women, right? And so you hear that and you're like, oh, okay, that's gross. You're an old dude and you want to go hang out with the, young women in Mexico. And then it like, I wanted to just like, again, do what we've done and go, 1950 and put that aside. But I respect this movie because it doesn't go away and it means something, right? Like he says that early on. He mentions it to Dix again when they're, those two escape the double cross and they're waiting on, some scheme from the insurance company to pay some portion of the money for the diamonds to get back. And he mentions it to Dix again. And then what do we see happen to his character, right? He gets as far as he can go with his thrift and his know-how. And he ends up at this little kind of hole-in-the-wall bar, right, in the middle of nowhere, where it's not quite far enough away from the city. And what's his downfall? He gives this young woman a bunch of nickels so she can play another song. And they make a specific point to say, when they walk outside and they're finally going to get in the cabin, he's going to get to Cleveland and get away with it. The cops are there. And what does he ask the cop? He says, how long have you been watching me? And the cop says, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes. And the guy's, and Reidenschneider says, right, just long enough to play a song on the phonograph or a record, right? And to me, that's beautiful, like, character development. What did you think of Reidenschneider?
No, I did love that. And I wondered, because often we have women just sexualized on film just to sell tickets. And so one of the very first things that he does in this movie when he's at Cobby's like bookie joint is when Cobby is going to go get someone else that they're going to talk to or whatever, he goes to like the pinup girl calendar and flips through it, right? And it's obvious he's presented himself as like this really sophisticated, very intelligent, and kind of over the hill kind of guy. And then he just goes to the pinup calendar. It's like, okay, I get it. Like, I believe that happens, but why is this here? And so for his last scene to essentially be with this, and I don't even think he calls them Mexican women. I think he calls them girls all the time. It's just girls. And I guess it is 1950, so that could be just a symptom of that. But there is something, too, where he's not looking for... I don't think there's any illusion that this guy is looking for love or for, like, even romance, really. He's just looking for physicality. And so the way that scene is shot, where he watches this young gal dance, who can't be more than, like, 18, maybe, and he's just, like, the camera is shot in such a way, like, from his POV, like, he is oogling her.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not fun to watch.
No.
It's not like, oh, cool dance moves, It's like, this feels creepy.
It's
and
grimy.
Wrong.
Yeah, the movie's grimy.
Yeah, and so that, I agree. The movie makes it very clear that is his downfall. And, when we're talking about characters' downfalls, we have Chiavelli, who gets shot, accidentally when the guard drops his revolver. And Chiavelli has done this all. You can tell they set this guy up to be the family man, like you mentioned. He has a infant, and he has a wife who loves him, and he thinks, oh no, he even tells a doc, the doc says, I envy you as a family man. Probably not really true based on what we just discussed about Doc, but that's what he says.
But maybe there is a thing there, right? That like clearly his downfall is, lust, essentially. It's not anything wholesome like having a family, but I don't know, man. I think I because the performance is so good, I think there may be more to that than just, he's like trying to flatter him or something. Maybe that is what he really wants, but he succumbs to his, his demons a little bit.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I do, I'm sure we've all talked to those same kind of people that give, their very, whatever their vice is. Let's say it is lust, and they come across someone that is married with the family, and they say something like, oh, I wish I could have that. I wish I could have done that, So yeah, I think that's fair. I stand corrected. I'd be willing to say, given how smart this movie presents all of its characters, that probably is open for interpretation in a good way, in that I'd find it very believable that Doc, he does feel that. He longs for that, but not enough to want to actually overcome any foible of his own. But going back to Chiavelli, this if anyone of that group had a real reason to live, to make it out alive, it's this guy who seems to have a very normal kind of nuclear family, and does love. He's proud to show off photos of his kid to Doc, and unfortunately Chiavelli dies, And I really like, Travis, what's your take on this? They say they're calling for the doctor, and I don't know that the doctor actually ever comes. We know that the doctor is delayed, and then later, the next time the cops are going to go, bust down the door and get Chiavelli, the priest greets them and is like, "Hey guys, it's you missed your opportunity. The dude's dead." That's an exact quote, by the way.
Yeah, that's it.
But I was curious if you also got that feeling that, ooh, maybe these guys really didn't. They were so afraid of getting caught and questions being raised that the doctor never was called.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we have. I'm not dismissing your question. I want to get to it. I don't know that we have time for every single side character, but quickly, that to me, the answer to that question comes down to Gus, right? Gus Manissi, played by James Whitmore. He's like this fantastic, like, he just fits in the world that John Huston is constructing. He's like, he owns a business, but he is the driver with experience and grit and loyalty, like all the things you'd want in a gangster buddy or whatever. He's the guy you want in the car for your heist, because he doesn't panic, he doesn't freak out, but at the same time, he has an edge to him that is really scary, I feel like, and in a believable way. So the whole thing about the doctor is he says, the doctor will be here soon to Maria, to Louis Chiavelli's wife. And she's, again, just for a character who has like 2 scenes, she's so good and so interestingly drawn, even though she doesn't need to dominate the film in any way. Their scene is so good. You know what I mean? Like they're sitting there and it's the most like painful, slow off-screen death because he's shot in the gut, which is the worst place, essentially to be shot. If you're not going to die right away, that's the worst because she tries to give her husband a glass of water, and Gus says, "Don't do that. He might be, you might have issues with his stomach. Like that could kill him." He says the doctor's on his way. She lashes out at him because she doesn't know quite what's going on, and she makes fun of his, his disfigurement, his hump, essentially. And he has this really like, I swear it's like a Quasimodo moment, not just because of the hump, but because of the way he reacts. It's like, I won't let anybody say that to me. I was born this way. It comes from a deep, dark place. Like you could see the bullies on the playground saying the same thing and him just deflecting it for years and years. It turned him into the hardened character that he is. And then later on, Justin, to your point, he says in the phone booth, the doctors are doing everything they can for him, but do I believe him? I don't know that I'm meant to. You know what I mean? I don't know that it matters because at that point he probably looks at Chiavelli and says it's a foregone conclusion. He's shot in the gut. It's just a matter of time, So that again, this movie is in an M-like way, like you brought up at the beginning. The word grimy keeps coming to mind, but really just dark. This is a dark place and a dark lens into the world, which I think it's good because it's true, right? Like the whole idea here is trying to bring about your deliverance from the town that someone says, if you want fresh air, don't look for it in this town, right? Like this town that is just essentially polluted with crime and, bad things by doing bad things to get your way out of it, which is what all these characters are really trying to do in the end. It's not going to work, right? You will not find your happiness at the end of that road. So in the latter part of this movie, we see all of the endings, sort of the dominoes fall down in very nicely paced and beautifully acted and shot fashion. We see Ryden Schneider get arrested because of the aforementioned jukebox scene. We see Gus ends up in prison with Cobby, who does welch in the end, which is it's a great scene between him and Dietrich where he just says sweating before it already starts. Dietrich just beats the living crap out of him. That I don't know how you felt about that scene, Justin, but like I was watching that like those are not fake slaps. Like he was slapping him repeatedly. And then Cobby just collapses in this really, I can imagine that actor just being like, give it to me again and slap me harder, and it's just, they're so committed, these actors, to this stuff. And that's part of the reason why it works. But yeah, let's get into the ending here. Cause we end up with, a dead Emmerich, an arrested Ryden Schneider, an arrested Gus, Louis dead. And the last part of this movie centers around Dix and Doll, who we haven't gotten to yet. She's really in the movie just as like an introduction to her. She's sort of trying to make her way into her own place, and you can tell there's a history between Doll and Dix, but it's pretty it's not super on the surface what's gone on between them. There's a little bit of a hint when she kisses him on the way out, almost just to say thank you, right, for letting me stay here for a couple days. But you see this look on her face, which I couldn't read. I couldn't read it as, does she not want to kiss him and she just feels obligated to, or is there a longing there? And then, that all makes sense later. But you want to speak to Doll and Dix and sort of how everything ends up here?
Yeah, so it seems, at least my take on their relationship was that she does care for him deeply. And it does seem by the movie's conclusion that because she's not a blood relative, she must love him to some degree. And Dix seems very, again, we've kind of talked about Sterling Hayden's Dix, how kind of flat the character appears, and it's so intentional because even as Doll is very much trying to speak in many different love languages to him, he says something similar to like, I just don't get it many times, and I take that at face value, that he really does not understand what she's trying to do when she tries to share her heart give her opinion on things, he frequently cuts her off, so he can air his own, private musings and thoughts. And so he does. There's a little bit of a build up to her and him leaving town, where he tells her, I really just want to get out of here and go back to the horse farm on Kentucky, where my family is from. And he talks about a horse that he remembers as a kid. And anyway, so by the movie's end, when he's been shot again by Bob Branham, the private eye that was working for Emmerich, and he's slowly, because it probably wasn't life-threatening, but because he doesn't get any medical attention, it does become life-threatening. And so he's just on this desperate mission by the movie's end to make it back to his Kentucky horse farm. And it's clear. It reminded me a little bit of the ending of The American with George Clooney.
Yeah.
Just this kind of hopeless quest, like, I just have to get to the end and it will be all right. Like, I just have to cross the river.
Yeah.
And it's not. And so the ending is him essentially arriving at the gates of the horse farm and, getting onto the pasture and just collapsing and dying there as the horses come up and sniff him and nibble at him.
Yeah.
And so it's this beautiful kind of ending. And I think if it represents what the novel's ending was at all, it's beautiful in its own sense, because justice really is done in its own kind of sad way for many of these characters. I think I wonder, just looking at some of those scenes, I can't help but think, and I'm talking again about the last scene here, where he's driving in the car. They're almost to the horse ranch, and he has this mumbling kind of monologue about, like, if Dad didn't sell the black colt, it'll all be okay. It's just this kind of, he's a little bit delirious, and he's lost a lot of blood, so he's not really making a lot of sense. But it's clear that he believes if he gets back there, everything's going to be fine. And Dahl's obviously panicking. The way that those sequences are shot, to me, rob the movie a little bit of being... The movie's already good, if not great, in my opinion. But it is... I honestly believe that if a couple of those shots were shot differently, that this would kind of stand above Head and Shoulders, and be remembered as, some kind of apex of cinema making. Obviously, it's already won a lot of awards. I'm not trying to take anything away from John Huston. No, I'm never going to be John Huston. But to me, if you're going to put Dix in a car and have him just mumble this kind of insanity, you don't get the same effect if you can't look that character straight in the eyes, in my opinion, and do that. And so that he's not afforded the opportunity to do that is a little bit of a missed opportunity, in my opinion. And then when they get to the horse farm, it's a very typical 1940s, 50s thing to do, where the score just, like, overpowers actors all the time, right? And so, in my opinion, that happens again here. And that I could be okay with it, but the camera is kind of, maybe this just sounds really pretentious, listeners, bear with me, but we're so focused on the characters. It's just wide enough to get them both in the frame, essentially. And the score is just screaming in your ear. I feel like there's missed opportunity there for a much wider shot, because these people are at the end of their rope. Dix is literally moments away from dying, and they're kind of in the middle. I mean, yes, they're at the horse farm, but there's no, like, the house is way in the distance. They're never there's no other people around. There's only the horses. And so to have an opportunity to see the hopelessness of it, just see how wide the distance is truly between Dix and the rest of humanity. I feel like if there were just a couple tweaks, this movie, which I already really admire and really like and give tons of kudos to everyone involved for, I feel like this could have been an even better movie with some changes in that regard.
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. For my money, the last half hour is super strong, because I think maybe I just looked at this from a slightly different lens, which was I in the moment where he's in the car and he's bringing back this idea of the black colt, right, which is the horse he mentions early on. He sort of establishes his home as his salvation, right? Like you said, there's this futile journey. If I can just get back home. And I couldn't help but think about Gone with the Wind for a moment, because, right, what's the last line? in Gone with the Wind, like tomorrow's another day. I'll go back to Terra. You know what I mean? Like it's this idea of if I go back home, everything will be fine. And you look at the end of Gone with the Wind and you look at the end of this and you're like, well, no, it won't, right? So I see him mumbling in the car and I'm thinking like he's about to die. Like we're watching him die in front of our eyes. Even though he's behind the wheel and he's almost there, like he is not making any sense. So I think maybe that was perhaps that was a thought. You know, that's how I read it. And also, you know, for my money, he's just like he's the right actor for this role. But I don't know, man, if he's the right actor to put in, you know, square extreme Sergio Leone close up and give that monologue. I don't know if he could pull it off. So I think maybe there's directorial restraint in there, just with a knowledge of the actors. And, you know, based on everything else we see in the movie, I'm kind of inclined to think John Huston just knows the limits and sort of shoots within those limits. But I could totally see how, you know, you might want that to be like, oh yeah, just knock that one out of the park or whatever. Like give me that close up, give me that wide shot. And you mentioned the score. I think that's very much worth noting because there's like no score in this movie. And I wrote it down several times. Like you get a little at the beginning credits and then throughout the whole grimy cityscape, the whole heist sequence, all the conversations and the fallout and the characters dying and getting arrested afterwards, no music. Like essentially none. It's a silent film other than dialogue, sound effects, and all the other stuff you hear. And then at the end, when the music accompanies this field and this farmhouse and this different location and light, right? Because this is a dark movie. There's not a lot of like daylight walking around town sequences. People are running around in the dark for, you know, 2/3 of this movie. The music came with the light, and that's why that sort of overwhelming score thing, it almost makes you squint in the same way that walking out into broad daylight might. That's my read on the end. I loved the last shot, and I think we already we spoiled ourselves on this one, Justin. I think we both loved the very last shot of, you know, Dick's laying in the field and the horse is just coming over to sniff him like, what's this dead lump of humanity? I think we have we've skirted most of the grimy streets here pretty successfully. Is there anything else you want to throw in for posterity that we didn't get to?
Well, it's only tangentially related.
Yeah.
And you know, just a final thought when we're talking about the acting capabilities of Sterling Hayden. You know, I'm not overly familiar with his greater body of work. But, you know, I maybe you're already aware, this guy, he was in the precursor of the CIA. He was in the OSS during World War II and did some kind of what the kids nowadays would call badass stuff.
Yeah.
Where he was, you know, parachuting into fascist Croatia, and he was, you know, doing some really high-speed, low-drag kind of things. And so I can't imagine that a guy that would be sent as an undercover agent behind enemy lines in the Second World War couldn't act, you know. Like I can't imagine that wooden guy that we see in this movie going, you know, to Yugoslavia and being like, okay, well, I'm you know, kind of Brad Pitt's Buongiorno kind of thing going on or something.
Buongiorno.
But I will concede that people that are able to play those kind of parts in real life and be incredible actors when the stakes could not be higher, don't necessarily have the same hardware to do that when it's just the pressure of a camera and a director.
Yeah.
So just that kind of weird aside to say, I think Sterling Hayden was a man of many talents.
Sure.
And so I kind of look forward to watching him in something else and seeing how far those talents can be stretched.
Yeah, it seems like this would be a really good double billing with... Oh, he's in Doctor Strangelove, too. I'm looking now, too, which we both think is freaking awesome. But yeah, he was in, you know, Kubrick's first Hollywood venture, The Killing, which is, again, it's sort of listed as like, you know, after Scarface, after Little Caesar, which are these two like big time gangster, you know, movies. It's like The Killing is the next thing. So be an interesting double billing to put those two in together back to back or something. The only other two things that I think we can just quickly touch on, and I don't want to send people into a deep slumber by going too long, but there is something to be said for Dahl's character could have come off, right, as very, again, perfunctory, not believable. Some of the stuff we say about like the 39 Steps where it's like, wow, they hated each other, now they love each other. It's not exactly the same, but she really comes in at the last, the last act of this movie, and I think just sells it. There's this romantic undercurrent to her motivations and what she's doing, but she just is such a sharp actor on screen that, when he's starting to just die on her in the car and she has to take over and drive and, bring him to that doctor that he ends up running away from anyway. Like, there's just a lot of good stuff that she does to make it not silly. Definitely honorable mention to her performance as well. And then I think we'd be remiss not to talk just for one quick second about the police commissioner's monologue, which is fascinating in its timing in the story. Like, this ends up being Dietrich is going to be, investigated for corruption, which he should be. They caught, 6 out of the 7 of the people they were looking for. And he's like, and we're going to get the 7th one. And he just does this amazing thing, right? Where he's talking to the press and everybody is like, they have this moment where they're like, what about Dietrich? Wasn't he corrupt? What are we going to do about that? What do you have to say about that? And he just makes the point like, yeah, he's going to be investigated and whatever, justice will be served, And then he just flicks on the radio, which is basically like the 911 calls that are coming in real time or whatever. And he flicks on 3 of these channels and they're playing simultaneously. It's just this noise of chaos, of crime being committed and being reported. And I don't know about you, but that was such an effective moment for me because it's not cheap or I don't know. There's nothing in there that's just like cops are always great or cops are always terrible. It's this very realistic, like, yes, corruption exists, but this is way better than nothing. What do you have for that last commissioner moment?
I think that was a really unexpected turn for me in this movie, that was even bothered to be said. And then it was bothered to be said in 1950 makes me think that the discussion really hasn't changed that much. The coverage certainly has, but I think that is always kind of like an M, right? What do we do with these people? What's the right? Is it criminal justice? Is it kangaroo court? What do we need to do? The same thing, I think, is a timeless issue for as long as police have been around. How can we trust them any more than the people that want to take from us? And it's a question that we should continue to face, I think.
Yeah, and for me, it works because it's not an argument from a cop about cops simply, right? It's a recognition of Dietrich. You know what I mean? Dietrich's going to end up in jail, just like Cobby, just like Gus. If we just take this story and play it out for a month, I don't buy that police commissioner, if he knew about Dietrich, wouldn't lock that dude up and prosecute and to the fullest extent let justice be served. So, more than we want to read into like a 2020 or 2021 lens on this, some sort of like political motivation. It's really just like we've said a million times, like people are all the same, and I think that's echoed pretty strongly on every front in the Asphalt Jungle. Now let's put ourselves in prison here for a minute, Justin, with the Asphalt Jungle, and see if it is time served.
You want about the law or something? No, it's okay.
I'm so very sorry. I propose that we consider this matter closed.
I sure hope you didn't do anything stupid, Jackie. See you when I see you.
I think this one will be reasonably quick because I loved this movie. It was really, really enjoyable. For the reasons we laid out, I would put this on my scale of how often would I rewatch this and is this worth my time at yes, it's worth your time. It's saying a lot of fantastic stuff. To me, I always look for that line of dialogue in a given film that sums up my favorite thing that it might be saying. And for me, this movie is all about Emmerich's line to his wife before he meets his tragic end. his wife says something like, how could you, all those people you do business with, all those hooligans, all those gangsters, I worry about you. How can you deal with them? And he says, well, they're not so bad after all. And he says, after all, crime is only a left-handed form of human endeavor. And to me, this movie just drives that nail home over and over. It's like when you leave people to their worst devices, when people are dissatisfied with their existences for any number of reasons, and they turn to, well, if I just do one more thing, even if it's a little off the books, even if it's a little, illegal or something, if I can just do the bad that I'm surrounded by and ultimately dissatisfied with, one more time, maybe I can get home or, find satisfaction or salvation, or however you read that ending with Dix. And I think this movie tells you the truth, and the answer to that is nope. That's not what's going to bring you ultimate happiness. It's certainly not what brings any of these characters ultimate happiness or closure. And I would watch this movie because it's kind of heavy. It's really good, and I wouldn't call it like a struggle to watch, but it's one of those movies that it sits heavy with you after the credits roll. So maybe every couple years or so, I can imagine flicking this on and appreciating the wonderful photography that we probably didn't talk enough about because the characters are so engaging. I think the direction by John Huston is really kind of second to none. And you can find something new, I bet, in every viewing of this film. So every couple of years for me, definitely worth the time served in the jail cell with it. Justin, how about you?
Yeah, couldn't have said that. That line is the line that stuck out to me too. So I will not try to give sloppy seconds on those really astute observations. In my opinion, we've really come full circle from you holding the revolver at me.
It's under the table,
in my belly at the beginning of the episode.
Still pointed at you.
Oh, okay. Well, alrighty. Well, I'm glad the police are only a phone call away.
That's right.
Yeah, I would be happy to watch this movie again. It's not exactly, it's somewhere in between on the spectrum of light and heavy. But I don't know, probably once every couple years or so would probably do it for me and make me a happy fellow.
That was a roaring success. Neither of us murdered each other, and we got through another great conversation. Wouldn't you say, Justin?
Well, what do you want me to say? You're holding the machete really close, so...
Yeah, I switched to a machete, everyone. Next week's film is a heist film, but a very different film. It's a Peter Sellers Pink Panther film. This is The Return of the Pink Panther from 1975. I haven't seen this one. Have you, Justin?
No, I haven't, but I'm excited to.
Yep, it should be good. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Let the movie speak.
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet, and all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.